moving on you, huh? You're out there live at a soccer tournament?
Yep, we're here at War Hill Sports Complex in Williamsburg. It's a beautiful day. It's Jefferson Cup, um, and definitely one of the biggest tournaments. It's multi-week for different age groups, and male, female. It's an awesome tournament. And unlike last week, of course, this week it's really nice. So that's why we're out here. I'm able to sit out here and do this with you, which is great.
Enjoy it, man. You've done blog entries on ankle sprains, and I think when you're at an event like that, of course, injuries happen. There's a lot of teams there. There's so many games being played, but to me, if there were stats on it, the most common injury at a basketball tournament, at a soccer tournament, is going to be the ankle sprain. So
Undoubtedly, yeah. I mean, it's so common, and there are three types of ankle sprains. And you think, Mark, you usually think of the most common one as, I stepped and I turned my ankle in. And it used to be in the olden days when we were growing up, it was, the fields are like behind like elementary schools, and there'd be dips in the ground and puddles, and you kind of turn your foot in. I mean, nowadays we have these like beautiful, generation 3, 4 artificial grass, and they're perfect fields, and they drain well, and they're nice. But guess what? We can still have non-contact injuries where you pivot and you move and your foot gets stuck in the ground a little bit and you turn it, or someone steps on your ankle when you're doing something. Just like in basketball, you're going up for a rebound, you come down, someone steps on your ankle. Football happening all over the place across. So ankle sprains, regardless of the field these days, are still extremely common. The inversion one is the most common. When we have a normal inversion sprain, here's our ankle. This is our lateral ankle, by the way, because the fibula bone. So we get a little
the outside of the
aware of
foot.
anatomy. We have our tibia bone and our fibula. And then we have our talus and our navicular below there. But what happens is the ankle turns in this way. And when it turns in this way, obviously it's ripping everything on the outside. And we have our anterior and posterior talofibular ligament, which is back here. And then we have our craniofibular ligament. Those are the big ones. We have a couple muscles that tend to be involved with that as well. And then if we're really unlucky, those structures don't work well and we end up breaking bone. Which you don't want to do. So any form of sprain complex or strain complex in the body, by basic, wording or what they're using with the nomenclature, this is really there's a grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and there's a British system which has 4 grades, where the first one doesn't. It's like basically delayed onset muscle soreness, illness. We don't count that. We look at a grade 1, generally speaking, as a sprain, strain. I'm kind of combining them. They are a little different. A sprain involves ligaments. A strain involves like more muscular tendon, muscle type of issues. But basically, when we have overstretched fibers, so they don't really tear, but they overstretch. So they're a little bit weakened neurologically. That's your grade 1. A grade 2 is when you start seeing black and blue in an area, and that occurs with a certain amount of tearing actually in the tissue. That's where you're getting blood seepage, blood loss. So that's internal bleeding, is that bruising. And then a grade 3 is when you're going to rip it off the bone. And sometimes those are going to require surgery to repair, or sometimes they don't repair them, just depending what ligament it is, where it is, and how bad the injury actually is. So that's what occurs. On the lateral ankle, we have 3 ligaments. We have, several, we have a couple major muscles, the peroneal longus and brevis, that are playing in there. On the medial ankle, so that with this ankle sprain, we said when inversion turns that way, eversion goes the other way. It's very difficult for it to go that way. Why? There's a lot more stability on the medial ankle.
Yeah, it's not built. It's not built to really move that way.
What's that?
It's not built to really move that way.
It's not really built to me that way. I mean, on the bone structure is a little bit more stable. We have 4 ligaments on the inside. We have a lot of muscles that are coming in there. Our flexor retinaculum. We have the peroneus. We have the tibialis posterior. We have the flexor digitorum, the flexor hallucis longus. Everything is a little more stable on that medial side. And you'll notice you just don't see them as often because it is more stable. But also the mechanisms of injury, usually when we're running or cutting, it's going to be where you plant your foot. It's going to tend to roll in, and that's how will damage the outside. Another one, which is the least common, is the high ankle sprain, and that's usually the one that no one can figure out. Number one, most people don't know how to treat it or even assess it. And number 2, even if they're kind of diagnosing it, it's usually the diagnosis doesn't tend to be accurate with that. And a lot of times you'll find a high ankle sprain along with a lower ankle sprain on the lateral side. That's usually when there's basically a dorsiflexion movement. Your heel's on the ground, dorsiflexion, it jams it, and you're basically pinning the talus into the fibula, and the tibia is kind of wedging it. And as it wedges it, it's actually separating the fibula from the tibia. So we have interosseous membrane in there that gets kind of ripped and torn. And there's an anterior and a posterior ligament that's also down here in this area that are getting torn as well. And so it leads to a lot of instability. But that can be on its own, or it can also involve, again, the lateral ligaments. Usually you'll see with that type of injury, the posterior talar fib more than the anterior talar fib, because the anterior talofibular ligament, when we go down and in, you can see it runs here in this
Hmm.
direction.
Hmm.
So it comes down and in, it tears. But if we are wedging it and dorsiflexing up, like we'd be getting on a high ankle sprain, we're pulling it up that way. So it's that back one that tends to be tearing a little bit more. But again, proper assessment is very important. Any of these ankle sprains can be extremely debilitating. And if not treated properly, it can take a long time to recover from. If they're treated well, you can get back to sport really quickly nowadays, especially with in sports med, interventions that, different, sports chiropractors and physical therapists and athletic trainers we have access to. Is phenomenal for recovery. And there's some things that work better than others. That's not the object of the subject matter for this. But ankle sprains can be debilitating. If they're treated well, you can get back out there. And that's what it's about. But we need to know, when they occur, what they look like, how they react, and what we can do to get them better.
So nobody can prevent ankle sprains. I mean, inevitably, all of us who have played enough sports at some point have sprained our ankles. It really stinks, right? But what can you do to minimize the damage ahead of time?
You have to really work a lot with um, maintaining proper foot ankle mobility and stability. And you're like, well, that's kind of generalized and vague. Make sure the knees and the hips are moving well. Most importantly is you work around and you work on balance work and you work on strengthening the muscles that are involved with your sport. And that's very, very important. And like you said, there's no way to prevent it, but to minimize it, if we strengthen the lateral leg musculature, if we strengthen the medial side musculature, if we work on our calf muscles appropriately, if we make sure that we're practicing, like when we're doing exercises and training, doing certain things that are agility based, like ladder drills, doing things that are strength based or jumping based, like plyometrics, changing direction on turf, or different changing direction, like using different things in sport, maybe like blaze pods or something along that line, where the light, light is bright, like, and you're kicking a ball that way and you move that way and you're moving your body and shifting. And what we have to do is keep recreating the movements of our sport, and then by doing that, our bodies will naturally start getting stronger for those movements. Think of it this way. If you've never played a particular sport and you have to cut and turn all the time on it, your ankle probably isn't used to it. You're more likely to get an injury because neurologically, you're not used to the movement patterns. But if you're always playing that sport and working on that sport and training on it, unless you're overtraining, which is another issue that you don't want to do, your body better recognizes the movement patterns and then will better be able to quickly neurologically adapt. If you ever have an athlete or any person that have a cast on their arm after a fracture, the radius, the ulna, or whatever, and then you take the cast off after a period of time, what does it look like underneath?
Yeah. I mean, it's atrophied.
It's atrophied,
Yeah.
right? So even if I were to put a brace on to prevent movement in the area, I am now using and relying on a brace instead of my own anatomy and muscles and ligaments and my tissues. Ligaments aren't really contractile tissue, more your muscles, but to move us, what we're allowing is atrophy in those areas, which then makes us more prone to injury.
Hmm. All right.
That we
Well,
don't want. We want our bodies to work. Life is movement. We've got to keep moving, and we've got to move properly. And we don't want to block that movement with a false ideology that, oh, if I put a brace on something, or I put a knee brace on every patient, on every football player, they can't get knee injuries. It's just not going to happen that way. It may not happen in that game because they're locking everything down, but the athletes aren't going to move as well. And then, they cross the street and turn to get into their car and they blow something out that way. I mean, like we need our bodies to work appropriately.
we can spend a lot of time talking about ankles. I think, we can get
A lot,
deeper
yeah.
into each of the three different types of sprains, which you've done entries on the blog about each one, right? And then we can
Yes,
also
there are
talk
three
about,
distinct blogs, yeah, on lateral, medial, and high, and they all have to be, taken care of a little differently. One encompassing all the way across the board. If
Mhm.
you were to say to me, well, what's one thing? What we really need to work on is single leg stance stability and movement. If you were to stand on one leg, bring the other leg up over 90 degrees, and basically roll in the pelvis area, so we're creating some core stability, and just watch your foot move. You'll see the toes curl and grip the ground. You'll see the ankle wobbling back and forth. It really gives us a good indication of not only mobility, but really stability in that area. And we should be able to stand on one leg for about 10 to 15 seconds with the eyes open and then with the eyes closed. And although that's not the absolute form of rehab, there's more because we're recovering from an injury. Ultimately, we should be able to do that with ease. And you'd be surprised how many people can't stand on one leg. And if they can't stand on one leg, they certainly shouldn't be cutting and dodging and moving back and forth and everything else, because guess what? Even in a static position, they're just standing there. They can't hold their weight. Now imagine loading that weight. When we walk, it's 1 to 3 times our body weight with every step. When
Mhm.
we jog, it's like 3 to 5. Now
Mhm.
you have people running, it's like 5 to 7 and jumping up to what, 10? So you have an
Right.
athlete cut hard on a leg, it could be 7, 8, 9 times their body weight. If they can't even stand on that leg without wobbling and falling over, there's probably a higher risk of, well, there is a higher risk of injury, and they need to keep working to stabilize and strengthen.
So people can find your blog entries at don'tbeameathead.com, correct?
Yes, and look under the blog categories, and you'll see you'll be able to search for them, and they'll be there. They're all in sequence. The first one was lateral, then medial, and then the high ankle sprain.
Yeah, I want to get deeper into this, and especially the whole idea of what we call train the sprain, where you can be ahead of it, right? And you can't eliminate ankle sprains, but hopefully you can somewhat prepare the joint and maybe minimize some damage. So that'll be
Yeah,
really
and there's a lot of data on that, and a lot of it, believe it or not, isn't even at the ankle level. A lot of it is how are your hips moving? How's your
mhm,
pelvis? You know,
mhm.
when you move and shift your body, you're then loading the lower extremity below that. Um, obviously. And if we're not transferring weight properly, we're not moving well, we're just continually loading the lower structures. Eventually they will give.
I got you. So I look forward to our next conversation, Alan. It's
You
always
too.
great talking to you. Very interesting. So, man,
Always.
good luck out there on the soccer field.
Yeah, it's getting warm out here. Thanks, Mark.
All right.
Talk to you soon.